Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. Yes, you're correct. Stanley Kubrick, The Bombing Run from Dr. Strangelove. It's where we are right now. I'm joined by two of my very good colleagues. First, my co-host and friend Mary Kissel of Opinion Journal each day at WSJ.com. Mary, very good evening to you.
Good evening, John.
Dr. Strangelove is one of the triumphs of the 20th century movie making about the Cold War. The bomb run with the B-52 sloppily flying over Russia, unaware of the fact that there's no war on, intending to drop its 20 megaton weapon on the Russian rocket facility and start World War III with, of course, Slim Pickens at the controls. And John Fund of the National Review Online joins. John, I understand you've just returned from Washington. I'm told that in the Kremlin, everybody's got a bellyache for laughing very hard. How is it in Washington, John?
They're agog, agape, and angry.
I begin with Syria because the news tonight is no more clear than it was 24 hours ago, but we do have some choice quotes from the Secretary of State, who is in Geneva meeting with Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia. Russia now very much a principal in this conciliatory conversation about the alleged chemical weapons attack August 21st in eastern Damascus by the Assad regime. Mr. Kerry today was frustrated, using the phrase, "this is not a game," upset about the chemical weapons conversations, whether there would be verification, transfer, who would be in charge of verifying the transfer. Mr. Kerry demanded comprehensive, verifiable, and also implemented in a timely fashion. Mary, I begin with you because you're covering this each day as the story keeps changing. Right now, is the opinion of your informants on the editorial board, the people who come to you each day, that this story has played out, or have we got a long way to go? How do you read this?
I think we do have a little bit a ways to go here, John. But I just want to say one thing about Secretary Kerry's comments. When you hear the Secretary of State say this is not a game, then the assumption is it is a game for the other side. Everybody knows this is a farce. Everyone knows they can't go in, secure these weapons, and magically transport them out. We've been trying to get rid of America's chemical weapons for many, many years now. It's not something you can sort of snap your fingers and do. But the Obama administration, to our mind, did this as a political ploy to buy time. So I wouldn't expect them to shut up shop and to go home soon.
I want to move to Washington and politics. Everything's politics in Washington. But first, your thoughts, John, about Syria. I follow Mary that it has a long way to go. But is there a sense in Washington that that John Kerry or Barack Obama are in charge of this, that they're dictating terms in a comprehensive fashion?
One would only wish. Somebody must be in charge, and unfortunately it's Vladimir Putin.
All right. I want to move immediately then. We're all agreed that we've got a long way to go and we have incomplete information in the negotiation. I want to move to the politics of this. I'll start with you, John, because you're just back from Washington. There are major political quandaries ahead. Mary and I have been reporting on the Affordable Care Act troubles and the continuing resolution, the CR. This is process. I understand it's quite inside language, but I think everybody understands it has to do with the budget ceiling and the necessity for the House of Representatives to pass or to provide a CR. Is there spillover? Is there influence from the unusual way the president has handled Syria with negotiations on the CR?
Well, first of all, I spoke with someone who is on one of the foreign relations committees, and they say it's very disconcerting because every few hours the Russians find a new way to humiliate Obama. It was, of course, the New York Times op-ed piece by Vladimir Putin this morning. This afternoon, it's the Syrians saying, before we even go into discussions, you're going to have to stop arming the rebels, which, by the way, we just started doing a few days ago after delays of months. So at every point, there's a new squeeze on the negotiations. We have to either offer up a new concession, and this is very troubling to people because they see it as ritual humiliation, not just of Obama, but of the United States. And this will spill into the three things that are coming right up, which is debt ceiling,
right,
continuing resolution, and the implementation of Obamacare on October 1st.
But is there enough political air, John, in Washington to deal with all of these things? In other words, do Republicans really have the space here to carry on a fight about the CR? Not just given their previous experience fighting about this, but the fact that there's so much focus on Syria, so much attention, the situation changes so much daily. How can they possibly fight about all of this other stuff at the same time?
Well, delay is always the option, the final option in Washington. Clearly, Republicans would be foolish to discuss a possible government shutdown at a time of national crisis when foreign policy and our military is in the news. So I suspect that we'll have a short-term continuing resolution to tide us over until Syria settles down. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. The debt ceiling, well, we all know how elastic that is. It can be prolonged a little bit longer.
And the Affordable Care Act. Mary, I'll start with you because the Affordable Care Act is very difficult to report. You and I both do it all the time, and we take pieces of it, but it's a very large creature, if I can anthropomorphize this. And talking about the tail in Maine is not the same as talking about the great big footprint in California. These are two different stories of the Affordable Care Act. The puzzle here is October 1st is the deadline, and my sense is that things are not ready. There's a lot of guessing going on. Has the president in some way inhibited the ability of the administration to tell that story because we're all watching over here where the missiles are supposed to fly?
Oh, I don't think the administration wants the American public focusing at all on Obamacare right now because it is such a slow-moving train wreck. Whether it's the lack of verification of people's incomes, there was a bill that passed the House today, it's going to die in the Senate, that would force HHS to ensure that the people who get subsidies, that would be, I don't know, taxpayer money, actually deserve to get the subsidies. There's the problem of data security. There's the problem of rising prices. There's whether or not the exchanges themselves are going to work at all. It's what it's going to look like when they click go. One government official said, we're just hoping this isn't going to be a third world experience. So in some respects, the Syria debacle is helping mask this evolving debacle here on the home front.
Clever plan, John. Joe Klein, who was an early supporter of the president, wrote a piece for Swampland today. This is in Time magazine, and you sent it to me. No reason to quote it. However, I don't think Mr. Klein picked up on this plan to divert our attention.
We're not conspiracy theorists here.
Look, in Washington, the most devout wish is we only wish there were a plan behind this incompetence.
The Affordable Care Act, John, it's a very large and tangled story. However, the concern right now of the Republicans has always been that once the subsidies start, you cannot turn it off. Is that still the narrative in Washington, especially in the House, that once we get to October 1st, it can never be stopped?
Except if something intervenes politically. And I don't think all of the exchanges are going to fail. I think there's some that are going to be properly run, but there will be enough problems, and many of those problems will be in states with vulnerable Democratic senators or vulnerable Democratic congressmen. The subsidies kick in January. October, November, December is the implementation of the exchanges. I believe that the Syrian disaster and the collapse of confidence in Obama's instincts and his leadership abilities will mean there will be many more Democrats pressing the White House for a delay in the individual mandate, a delay in other parts of Obamacare, simply to get this past the 2014 election. They are continuing to fear, especially in the wake of the Colorado recalls, where Hispanics and blue-collar voters showed up in unprecedented numbers to vote out 2 Democratic state senators this week. They are very worried about a 2014 debacle. They view Obamacare as the biggest albatross around their neck. There will be more and more of them pressuring the White House to get this off the table and away from the 2014 election.
Well, John, even former President Clinton weighed in today saying that parts of Obamacare need to be fixed. And, they've always been frenemies.
Well, it's even more interesting than that. Remember, Obama touted Clinton's agreement to give a speech praising Obamacare as Mr. Explainer has finally arrived. Well, Mr. Explainer did arrive, and there was none of the rhetoric and none of the impassioned appeals of the Democratic Convention of last year. He basically read from the healthcare phone book. And it was an astonishing performance.
And pointed out a lot of problems, too, John, and said, there are fixes that we need to be made here.
On the one hand and on the other hand.
Yeah, it was classic Clinton.
President Clinton is enjoying this more than he should be allowed to.
detail here. Your opinion, John. The president has a calendar. He sees the Affordable Care Act. He sees October 1st. And then suddenly, after 30 months of civil war, he decides that he's going to send the Arleigh Burke destroyers to the Syrian coast and make threats against Assad. Was the president thinking of the Affordable Care Act? Your opinion, John?
No, of course not.
And
everything is compartmentalized on this.
And so foreign policy and domestic policy are two different ships for him.
I do not believe that he thought he could solve Obamacare's problems because he has an inordinate faith and confidence in it because it's his byproduct. I think he will be forced to think that it's a political problem only by his own party, which is vulnerable in the 2014 election.
John Fund of the National Review Online and my colleague and co-host Mary Kissel of Opinion Journal each day, WSJ.com at 1 p.m. East Coast time. I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show.